Good evening, everyone. It's nice to meet you for the second time in this beautiful auditorium at our program, Amazing Discoveries. First of all, I thank all the charming, precious, wonderful, most beautiful, most amazing ladies with golden hearts. All of you deserve our heartfelt congratulations with the Mother's Day. And let's give a round of applause to all the precious ladies who are here. We thank you for giving some of us birth into this world and for beautifying the world and its life. We thank God for our precious mothers and all ladies and mothers to be. Anyway, let me ask you a question. Could I see the hands of those who were at our seminar yesterday? All right, wonderful. And could I see the hands of those who are here for the first time tonight? Oh, wonderful. Let's give them a hand of applause. Thank you for coming and joining us. We'll be doing little reviews of what we've been studying before. But in the meantime, I would like to remind you that tomorrow we're going to give you a very special book, which is one of America's best sellers. It's a book on popular science, and you will receive it tomorrow as you register at the entrance. Well, let's continue our acquaintance. My name is Vadim Butov. I'm a lecturer from Avondale College, Australia. And some people ask me, what is my accent all about? And my accent is not purely Australian. My accent is more Eastern European because I was born and grew up in Russia, but for many years I've been living in Australia and I'm an Australian citizen. But also languages have always been my great love. Some people ask me, how many languages do I practice? I know on a more or less proficient level 6 languages, which include Russian, Ukrainian, English, Tatar, it's an Asian language, ancient Greek and ancient Hebrew. And on top of it, I can freely read and understand and partially speak another 8 languages, most of which are Slavic languages like Bulgarian, Czechoslovakian, Serbian, Croatian, Polish language, and the language of the Republic of Belarus. I took many years to learn and study a lot of Slavic languages. And nowadays, I'm paying a lot of attention to the Turkish language and also some Asian languages. My dream, and that is my goal in life, that by the time of retirement, I need to know at least 24 languages. So that is my goal. So currently, 6 on the proficient, high proficient level, 8 in development, and I am aiming at another 10. So I'm aiming at more languages to learn. So because this helps me understand more people, languages are beautiful doors to various cultures, and as I traveled around the world, I found that people are so wonderful and so charming. And the more languages you learn, the better you understand not only the culture, but the common origin of all human beings. You might have heard about the great Tower of Babel. Have you heard about the Tower of Babel, where all the languages of the world were once separated? Well, once I was running these seminars in the city of Ufa in the Russian Federation, and I was approached by a scientist who is one of Russia's leading linguists. And he shared with me his big study on world languages. And a similar study was undertaken just a couple of years ago in America by the University of Utah. And both studies came to the same conclusion, that once upon a time, all humans in the world spoke one mother language. In actual fact, both studies identified up to 600 words that if you know those 600 words, you will be able to basically understand any language on the globe. Let me give you just one example. Where do we all live? On what is the name of our planet? Earth, okay? How do you spell it in English? E-A-R-T-H, okay? So you've got a couple vowels, and then you've got Of course, the British, they don't voice the R sound often, it's earth. But the Americans, they make it emphatic earth. I'm trying to learn American, but it's very difficult. I'm breaking my tongue every time I'm trying to speak American English. Because I'm just wondering, how could you pronounce the R sounds in such inconvenient places and words? It's not words, it's words. How do you... well, I'll try my best. I'll try to at least present you one lecture closer to the end of our seminar, close to the 28th, trying to use American pronunciation a little bit. I'll try to learn it my best. Well, the word earth. Now, you know, who knows the mountain range which separates Europe and Asia? Urals, thank you. You've got the first letters U, R. All right. Now, who knows how the word earth is translated into Hebrew language? Does anyone know? It's aretz. You've got a vowel and an R, okay? So the word earth in most languages of the world starts with, Ural Mountains is those big mounds which separate piles of earth in the minds of ancient people. It's a vowel and letter R. Now, one of the most ancient cities in the world was Ur of the Chaldeans, okay? Ur of the Chaldeans. It was a big a city which had a big pyramid in the ancient times, a big mound built of earth. So the word earth is almost the same in most languages around the world. And I can give you scores and scores of other examples showing that once upon a time, all humans in the world were one family and spoke the same language. So modern science, the University of Utah, discoveries in Russia, so Americans and Russians, the leading linguists are coming to the same conclusion, that the information which is contained in this book, the ancient Hebrew Bible, is actually verifiable by science, even by linguists. Well, our lecture tonight is The Mysteries of the Ancient King's Dream. This is just a little deviation from our main content. Let me invite you to our second program. But before that, the program tomorrow. Tomorrow we will talk about the invaders from other worlds. We'll talk about a possibility of life existing on other planets. And could residents of other planets actually come and visit planet Earth? We'll talk about a multidimensional theory and about many other things which modern science suggests us. And then we'll talk about the origin of human suffering. Tomorrow's lecture is going to be an amazing journey into the world of space and to the origins of human suffering and human problems which all of mankind is experiencing at this time. So tomorrow, come, bring your friends, invaders from other worlds. Well, tonight, it's the mysteries of the ancient king's dream. The mountain you see on the screen is Mount Sinai on Sinai Peninsula. And today it's a very peaceful place, it's a very deserted place. But once upon a time, this mountain was burning with fire, where the leader of an ancient nation of Israel met with the great God Yahweh, the great Jewish God. It was in Egypt where for 400 years the Jewish people were in slavery and they were tormented by the Egyptian pharaohs. It all continued until the time when Prince Moses took that nation out of Egypt. So you remember the beautiful American song, Let My People Go. So they left Egypt and they marched across the Red Sea to the so-called Promised Land. Well, some people are asking us questions. Moses is claimed to be an author of the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And people ask a question: could it be true? And could he had possibly written those books 3,500 years ago? Was there literacy in the Middle East? That was the question of many people, because some people even questioned the very existence of Moses. Well, if you go to Syria, you will find the remains of the city of Ebla. It's not very safe, actually, to go to Ebla today because there's a lot of fighting in these places. But yesterday I mentioned to you that it is in Ebla where they found the world's biggest library of clay tablets. On those clay tablets, in ancient language, in cuneiform, people wrote history, trade agreements. They described their lives. And it was right here in Ebla where they found for the first time an extra biblical mentioning of Abraham and Isaac. And also it is here on these tablets where they discovered the historical evidence of the existence of Sodom and Gomorrah. They found trade agreements of the citizens of Ebla with the Sodomites and the citizens of Gomorrah. Because a lot of people thought that Sodom and Gomorrah never existed, and Moses wrote down just a fairy tale. Well, the discovery of Ebla shows that Sodom and Gomorrah were real cities, and they were once supernaturally destroyed in the valley of the Dead Sea. And even the very Dead Sea is a unique lake. It's almost 500 yards below sea level, and it's almost 500 yards deep. The content of salt in it is 33%. You will never be able to drown in this lake. You can float on top of it. And it is around this lake that there were a lot of archaeological diggings. Now, if you go to the country named Jordan, you will discover that in Jordan, and by the way, you will discover that in Jordan there is a place called Bab Edra. And it is in this valley where they found huge layers of burnt sulfur. They found the remains of a gigantic fire which once consumed the whole valley. Now, there's no evidence of any volcanic activity, that there was a volcano eruption or explosion. But there's evidence of a giant fire. They also managed to dig out a number of cities. And those cities were all covered by a thick, sometimes 2.5 yards thick layer of ash. These are some of the remains of these ancient cities. And they found clay pottery, they found the remains of human beings. Even cemeteries were covered with ash. And that was interesting for the archaeologists, because usually when enemies would come and burn the city, they would burn the city, but they would never touch the cemetery. Ancient people venerated the dead. But in these cases, a thick layer of ash was covering the city and the cemetery, which was quite unique. It's impossible at the moment to identify which one of those cities is Sodom and which one is Gomorrah. But today archaeology believes, beyond any potential doubt, that Sodom and Gomorrah were historical places. And when the Bible talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, it's telling us the truth. This book has been verified on hundreds of occasions by the discoveries of archaeology in the past 200 years. This book is not a collection of myths and fairy tales. This book was very correctly and very precisely copied through thousands of years by copyists who were willing sometimes to put their lives on the stake to preserve the ancient texts. Now, who knows where my slide is? Okay, wonderful. Now, a lot of people sometimes say, well, the Bible and science contradict each other. Well, let me give you some interesting statements. A statement written 3,500 years ago. It says, God hangs the earth upon what? Upon nothing. Ancient people who lived in those times in the Middle East believed that the earth was sitting on a turtle. Some believed that the earth was sitting on 3 whales. The Indians believed that the earth was sitting on a giant dragon. The Chinese were thinking of a big dragon on whom the earth sits, and the earth was flat. Well, the Bible is the only ancient document from the era of slave age which talks about the earth hanging on what? On nothing. And this was proven by astronomy only thousands of years later. We have many unique statements in Scripture which were only later, hundreds of years later, verified by scientists. Let's try to check another picture. It says, when he gave to the wind its what? Its weight. There was a time when most human beings believed that the air is weightless. But it was only in the 19th century when it was discovered that the air has weight. The atmosphere has a lot of weight. Also, another unique thing about this book is the unity of its ideas and harmony. The Bible consists of 66 books. It took 1600 years to be written, from the 15th century BC to the 1st century AD, and more than 40 people of all walks of life, prime ministers, kings, shepherds, fishermen, they were authors of this book. And they were all like players in a giant symphonic orchestra directed by one director, giving us one content and one great book. Another interesting thing that proves the authenticity, historicity, and the truthfulness of this book is its prophecies. This book contains more than 5,000 predictions of the future. It has a lot of predictions of the future. And tonight we're going to look at one of the major predictions of the future which this book can share with us. Now let us, in our minds, only in your minds, travel to Iraq. Now you know that Iraq as a country is on fire at this stage, and Iraq is not a safe place to go. The American Ministry of International Affairs, the Secretary of State will discourage you to travel. But at least on photographs, let's go to Iraq and have a look at the remains of the ancient city of Babylon. Saddam Hussein, former dictator of Iraq, he did a lot of excavations here and a lot of restoration works. His work was preceded by a number of archaeologists who were trying to identify the remains of once one of the world's big capitals. It had more than 600 temples to pagan gods. It had beautiful palaces. It had one of the seven wonders of the world, the so-called hanging gardens of Semiramis. This was a temple tower in Babylon which was 7 floors and roughly 80 yards high. It was a marvelous city decorated with gold. The system of air conditioning was first invented in Babylonia. Today we use electric engines and electric motors to air condition our homes and workplaces. In those days they needed thousands of slaves to produce the current of air just for the royal couple and their children at the hanging gardens of ancient Babylonia. The Greek historian Herodotus describes them as one of the great wonders of ancient world. Those gardens were built by King Nebuchadnezzar for his beloved wife Amytis. It was in 1899 when the German archaeologist Robert Tischendorf started excavating Babylon. And he found the remains of ancient buildings, palaces. Here, if you don't mind, I'll give you the sign and you could change slides. He found also clay tablets which were talking about Nebuchadnezzar, the great builder of Babylon. Now, a lot of skeptics said Nebuchadnezzar could not have possibly been the builder of Babylonia because Babylon existed long before his time, and it was Queen Semiramis who actually built Babylon. Well, when excavations started, the skeptics had to be silenced because the skeptics, they discovered that Babylonian recordings almost never mentioned Semiramis. But the Babylonian chronicles mention Nebuchadnezzar as the one who took a small city and expanded it, rebuilt it, reconstructed, renovated it, and turned it into a giant capital of ancient world. Here's one of the clay tablets saying, "I have built fortress of Esagila in Babylon and exalted glory of my reign forever." He was the one who left behind thousands of clay tablets talking about his conquests of different countries, talking about the construction of temples and beautiful palaces, the walls, the great Ishtar gate. And by the way, it is from Babylon that we borrowed a lot of things that we are sharing today. The great feasts and celebrations which modern Western civilization has were originally born in Babylonia. For example, Easter, which in the Western civilization is connected to the resurrection of Christ, was originally the feast of Ishtar in ancient Babylonia. Or Christmas, which we celebrate on December 25 as a supposed time of the birth of Jesus Christ, in actual fact was the birth of the sun god in ancient Babylonia. And later in our lectures, we'll come back to Babylon on numerous occasions and show you how Babylonians influenced the development and the flow of human civilization. We know that their main god was this big thermonuclear reactor, the sun. And it was because of the sun that Babylonians created a day of worship when they all rested and worshipped the sun. In the Western civilization today, most Christians venerate this day because of the resurrection of Christ. But originally the Babylonians venerated it as a day of the sun, and in English language it's called what day? Sunday, okay? So it comes to us from Babylonia. Anyway, about ancient Babylon you find a lot of prophecies, and they will be reflected in the future history, and we'll touch on that tonight. For I am God, he says, and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning. So God in Scripture says that I know the end from the beginning. Now, what is that beautiful piece of machinery? Oh, that's another clicker. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. By the way, a lot of people ask, who are the assistants and helpers at this program? Let me tell you, everybody who's helping at this program, welcoming you, greeting you, bidding you goodbye, they're all volunteers. And at these programs, no one is getting paid. We want to do this program because we want you to feel good, and we want to give you a lot of benefits and blessings. I'm using half of my 2017 vacation to come and run this program for you, and I'm getting enormous pleasure by being here in Lexington and sharing in this seminar with you. We want you to feel good, and we want you to feel benefited and blessed by these seminars. Anyway, let's continue. There are prophecies, and there are more than 5,000 prophecies in this book. And there are local, literal prophecies like the prophecy about ancient Babylon. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pride of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. So ancient prophecy said that once upon a time there will be a moment when Babylon will be destroyed and overthrown. And also another prophecy said it'll never be what? Could you read it for me? Inhabited or dwelt in for generations. It says it'll be destroyed and it'll never be inhabited. Well, we know that many ancient cities like Jerusalem, Jericho, Damascus, and many others were destroyed on multiple occasions. And they were rebuilt, and many of them are capitals of Middle Eastern countries today. But Babylon was once destroyed, it faded down historically, and it is not inhabited even today. And Babylon shall become a heap of what? Of ruins, without inhabitant. And if you, please don't dare do it, but if you were to travel to Iraq, you would find that there are only the dead remains of that city. Another prophecy said, surely the Lord God does nothing without revealing his secret to his servants. Who? The prophets. So people ask a question. How does God communicate with mankind? Well, yesterday I was talking about loneliness. Is there a way out? And yesterday we were looking at the scientific evidence of the existence of God. We mentioned that the splendor of the universe, the complex machinery of different galaxies, the laws of heavenly mechanics are telling us that the universe could never have made itself. It was not brought into existence by blind chance. It was an intelligent act of creation. And if a Big Bang brought the universe into existence, then Big Bang was a controlled explosion, a very intelligent one. And life on Earth, the flora, the world of plants, fauna, the world of animals, and even the nature of human beings are telling us that life could not have made itself. The self-origin of life is impossible scientifically. And therefore there must be a creator, as Leonardo da Vinci said, the first engine who stands behind all these things. Well, if God exists, people ask a question, how does he communicate with his creation? And a lot of people ask a question, why wouldn't he just come to us and talk to us one-on-one? Why wouldn't he appear in this auditorium suddenly in a bright splendor of light and just amaze us with his presence, and everybody will be forced to believe? Well, tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about the philosophy of freedom. And but we know from this book that God is love, and he respects the freedom of human beings. I believe that God remains invisible in order not to force his presence into our lives. He is extremely tactful and delicate. And if there's an atheist and he does not want to believe, God is not going to force his presence into his life. He is not going to make him believe. Okay? And therefore God remains invisible, but he has means of communication. And one of those means of communication is prophecy. He inspires people who wholeheartedly believe in him, and he gives them a supernatural revelation, which enables him to give mankind what he thinks, what he intends to do, what his plans are. And in the next 2 weeks, we're going to review over 100 most interesting biblical prophecies. Well, tonight we'll look at the book of Daniel, chapter 2. And let's travel back in time, 2,600 years ago, to the palace of King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, King Nebuchadnezzar was sleeping. He was a mighty king. He conquered most of the Middle East. He was a great warrior. And suddenly he wakes up in cold perspiration. He's frightened. He is terrified. He has a nightmare. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So he invites all the great astrologers, all the interpreters of dreams to his palace, and they come to him and say, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation." They were quite accustomed to come to king's palace, and he would tell them his dreams, and they would open their sacred books and look at the stars and give him oracles about a bright future that is awaiting the ancient Babylonia. But the king at this time, to their grave disappointment, had completely forgotten what he was dreaming about. And then he threatened them and said, "If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn from limb to limb." That was not difficult for the kings of that time. They would, they would utter a word and hundreds of heads would fly off their necks. And the magicians, the wise men, are puzzled, they're frightened, they're distraught, and they're coming back to the king and they're telling him, "Well, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand." And they knew what was going to happen. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be what? Be destroyed. Among those sentenced to death were 4 young men who at that time were not in the palace. They were the Hebrew captives whom Nebuchadnezzar took from the city of Jerusalem when he leveled the city to the ground and destroyed the temple of King Solomon. So the decree went forth that the wise men were to be slain, and they sought Daniel and his companions to slay them. So Daniel and his friends, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, are being looked after so that they could also be destroyed among the wise men. But Daniel comes back to the king, and he is begging him to give him one night. He says, "I will ask my God, the Creator, the invisible one, the God of the Jewish people, and he will give me the dream and its interpretation." He was granted some bail, some time of grace, and all night he and his friends have been crying out their souls to the skies, asking for an answer, for a reply. And the answer did come. And in the morning, without any fright or fear, he comes and stands before the king of the civilized world. And then he tells him, "No wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery which the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in where? What time? In latter days." So that was not just an ordinary dream. You know, sometimes we have nightmares. I remember my childhood. Okay, let me tell you. I was growing up in Siberia. And the Soviet media was talking about the possibility of a nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. I think the American media was talking about that possibility on that side. So we were on 2 sides of Cold War. And you know, once I had a nightmare, because they used to tell us how dreadful life in America was. And I had a nightmare. I slept and I was dreaming and I thought that I lived in America. And when I woke up, I was shaking. And my mom looked at me and said, Vadim, what happened? You look very pale and you look very frightened. I said, Mom, I was dreaming I was living in America. And then I thought to myself, how happy am I to be living in the Soviet Union? You know, you have some nightmares, okay? Because we had our own propaganda, which did not tell us the truth about this country. And I think you had the similar propaganda on this side. But in actual fact, when I finally discovered my American friends, I realized that they were some of the best people in the world. And the most enjoyable people to deal with. And I still remember when there was a lot of cultural exchange happening in 1980s. I was admitted to the National Honor Society of American Secondary Schools because a good student from the Soviet Union. We had a lot of those beautiful things. But anyway, nightmares do happen. You may eat a lot before you go to sleep and you'll have a nightmare. You may even see a nuclear war happening. Or if you travel overseas and you suffer from jet lag. Currently I'm suffering from jet lag because in my head I have Australian time and here am I in American time. And in the past 2 or 3 days I had a lot of nightmares. I had a lot of horrible dreams where Russia, Australia, and America combined all in one dream somewhat, okay? And I saw as if Lexington was in Australia and Australia was in Russia. Anyway, the dream of King Nebuchadnezzar was not a nightmare. It was a prophecy. It was a prediction of the future. It was very specific and very colorful. Let's look at what he saw. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. Yes, it was a frightening dream. The head of this image was of fine what? Gold. Its breast and arms of silver. Its belly and thighs of bronze. Its legs of iron. Its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So this was a very interesting image. And by the way, in its construction, it could have reminded Nebuchadnezzar about the great temple tower, because ancient Babylonians built a big temple tower in the middle of Babylon. It was called the ziggurat of Etemenanki. It was roughly 80 yards tall, so it was about, 30 floors high. It was a big structure. And the bottom level was made of clay. The next level was made of iron. And then the next level was made of bronze, and the next level made of silver, and the top level, the final floor, was made of gold. So the structure of the temple tower and the structure of this image from Daniel 2 are very similar to each other. Anyway, this was the image, and you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand. And we know that in Babylonia there were no stones. All the stones were artificial ones. They had made clay bricks. There was hardly any stone in Mesopotamia between Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it smote the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled what? The whole earth. So this was indeed a nightmare, because for Nebuchadnezzar to see a stone, that would be a nightmare, because stones did not exist in Mesopotamia. All land was just clay. And that was a giant stone, and it becomes a mountain, and the valley of Mesopotamia, or valley between Tigris and Euphrates, was perfectly flat. There was not even a hill in that valley. And suddenly he sees a mountain, a giant mountain, which would remind him of the mountains in Israel, where he once destroyed the city of Jerusalem. And for Nebuchadnezzar, that stone was like a symbol of the God of Israel, and the image was like the symbol of his pagan gods, to whom the big temple tower was once dedicated. Well, Nebuchadnezzar is curious. He is eager to learn the interpretation. Well, we have a problem here. Everyone who reads this ancient document, the Jewish Bible, finds two types of prophecies. Some prophecies are literal. It says, for example, Babylon will be uninhabited. It's a literal prophecy. It says it will be uninhabited, and if you go to Babylonia today, there's no one living there. It's a literal prophecy. Literal prophecy, literal fulfillment. The second type of prophecy is symbolic prophecy. And in this case, are we dealing with literal or symbolic prophecy? Symbolic. Now, how do we correctly understand and interpret the symbols? Well, I suggest you 3 key principles. Number 1, use the text itself. Don't go anywhere else. Use the text. Number 2, look for the clues in the text. The text will interpret itself. And only then, number 3, look at how the prophecy is fulfilled in history. 3 principles. Number 1, look at the text. Number 2, the text will interpret itself. It will explain itself. Number 3, look at how the prophecy is fulfilled in history. And the interpretation did not make itself to wait. Daniel says, you are what? The head of gold. So Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, and his kingdom, the kingdom of Babylon, is represented in this dream by the head of gold. Many historians agree with this statement. They are talking about Babylon as the golden kingdom. It was with gold that Nebuchadnezzar decorated many temples to pagan gods. It was with gold that he decorated his palace. It was gold that was paid in tribute to Nebuchadnezzar by all the conquered nations. It was gold, gold, gold everywhere. Well, the prophecy continues. It says, after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. And we all know what happened several generations later. One of his descendants, King Belshazzar, was feasting in the palace when Babylonian was surrounded by the army of Persian invaders. They were all celebrating until the moment they saw a strange, fiery, bright inscription on the wall, which was written by a bloodless hand. A prophet was summoned to the palace, the interpreter of ancient signs and omens. He was no longer a young man like he was in the days of Nebuchadnezzar. He was an old man who could barely walk. They brought him into the palace, Daniel the prophet. And he read the inscription for King Belshazzar. But there was nothing comforting. It was like a sentence. Meneh, Meneh, Tekel, and Parsin. Meneh, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and whom? And Persians. And we know that it was that night when another prophecy was fulfilled. 200 years before these things happened, in the book of Isaiah, it said, thus says the Lord to his anointed. To whom? Can you read this name for me? To Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to open doors before him, that gates may, what? Not be closed. An interesting detail. So the prophecy says it will be King Cyrus who will conquer the Middle East, and the gates will be opened for King Cyrus. Well, another prophecy, just a few decades before this happened, said, a drought upon her what? Her waters, that they may be dried up, for it is a land of images, and they are made over idols. So the prophecy said that the waters of Babylon will be dried up. And let us look at what happened historically. When you go to Iran and you look at the cylinder of King Cyrus, which describes the conquest of Babylon by Medes and Persians, you will find an interesting story. When Medes and Persians approached Babylon and surrounded the city, Babylonians were locked inside, but they were not afraid, because the city had enormous resources. They could survive easily, eating freely for 3 years. Babylonians were so brave that the Chronicle tells us that they were taking bags of wheat and corn and grain and throwing those bags to the Persians, saying, we have enough food for ourselves and we have enough food for all the Persians, our enemies. Babylonians believed that they were inside an impregnable fortress. Well, the Persians did not waste their time. They brought thousands of slaves who started digging a channel, a canal, to divert the water of Euphrates River away and around the city. So the city lost its water supply. The riverbed in the city of Babylon dried. It became swampy, and Babylonians could even walk on it. And the night when the city was taken, some people betrayed the city, and they left the gates opened. And the Persians penetrated the city, set the place alight. Belshazzar was killed, and the prophecy was fulfilled. Exactly, precisely as it was predicted. The doors will be left open, and that's what happened. And here you've got a picture of King Cyrus, and he is the great conqueror. And now on the historical arena, you find a new champion. It was Medo-Persia. So the golden head is represents Babylon. The silver chest represents Persia. And we know that some historians call Persia a silver kingdom, because all the gold was taken by the Babylonians, and the Persians had to be satisfied with silver paid in tribute by the nations they conquered. Well, the prophecy continues and says, and yet a third kingdom of what? Bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. For 200 years, the Persians were invincible. And they waged many wars with a little rebellious place called Greece. Greece at that time was divided into many little small city-states. And then comes a Macedonian king by the name of Philip the Macedonian. And by bribery, and by using a little bit of Macedonian corruption, he buys those cities basically. He unites them all and builds one big army. He arms the army with bronze weapons. It was an army which was very similar to the American army today. When America went to Iraq, the Iraqi army had no chances against the American army for one reason. The Iraqi army of Saddam Hussein was much bigger. It was 500,000 soldiers. But the American army was victorious for one reason. It was very high technological army. The best aircraft, the best satellite navigation, the best technology. So the army of ancient Greeks and Macedonians was small. It was only 30,000 people. The Persian army was 1 million people. But they were better armed, better organized. It was the elite force. And this army was led to the eastern conquest by the son of Philip the Macedonian, and his name was Alexander the Great, or Alexander the Macedonian. A young man, an ambitious young general. He beats the Persians in the Battle of Arbela in 331 BC. And the Persian kingdom was conquered by the Greeks. And they would continue in the east all the way to India. Even in India, they would destroy the Indian army of King Porus. They would expand the realms of the Greek kingdom, which would leave behind to all of us the Greek culture, the Greek democracy, the Greek sciences, the Greek arts. Today, all of mankind is enjoying the achievements of ancient Greek civilization. All the kingdoms we're describing today and we're discussing today, they left behind a trace in world's history. And even in your homes, in your everyday lives, you have a lot of things which those people passed on to us historically. So there was Babylon, Persia, and the Bronze Kingdom is Greece. Ancient Greece, with its scientific achievements, with the democracy of ancient Athens, with its theater, poetry, with its arts. Great Alexander the Great, who left behind the tactics and the war strategy for the generals of succeeding generations to learn. Then comes the fourth kingdom. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as what? As iron. Then comes the fourth kingdom. And because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things, and like iron which crushes, it shall break and crush all these. So then comes another kingdom, an iron kingdom. We know that once a small colony in Italy, just a little village founded by Romulus and Remus, young men fed by a she-wolf. The Romans grow up into a republic. form legions, arm them with iron and steel weapons. They destroy Carthage, a mighty kingdom in northern Africa. That's the area we call Libya today. Even the great Hannibal of Carthage could not withstand in those great 3 Punic wars. They conquer northern Africa, southern Europe. They conquer all of the Middle East. They expand and become one of the biggest empires in the ancient world. And later, when the republic would be replaced by the dictators, it would become an iron monarchy of Rome. Every year, through the triumphant arch of Rome, the generals would come and tell about the new conquests. It was in 168 BC, when at the battle in Pydna in Greece, the Greek army was ultimately destroyed. And now Rome had no competitors on the world arena. They would build the Roman order, the Roman justice, Roman jurisdiction. By the way, even today in courts in America, local courts and the federal court, the Supreme Court, on every level, they're using the court principles which we inherited from ancient Romans. It was in ancient Rome, in ancient Roman times, when Christianity as a conviction, as a set of ideas, was first born. It was in those days when Christians were fed to the lions and destroyed. It was in Roman times when Jesus Christ was crucified on the cross. It was in Roman times when the city of Jerusalem was destroyed, burned and leveled to the ground, and the Jewish people were scattered around the Roman Empire. It was a big kingdom, a big place in world's history. But, and there came a moment in time when some Roman emperors started talking about the eternal city. The eternal city was Rome in their minds. They believed that there would be no end. But those who would read the ancient prophecy of Daniel would realize that the prophecy would continue and the Roman Empire would not last forever. You all remember feet of iron and clay. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a what? A divided kingdom. So the Roman Empire would split. And but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the miry clay. So what happened to the Romans? First of all, the Roman Empire was divided into 2 parts. It was the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, or also called Byzantine or Byzantine. Byzantine would continue until the 15th century, when Constantinople would be taken by the Turks in 1453. But the Western Roman Empire, where you have the city of Rome in Italy, was divided into many parts in the 5th century AD. It was in the days when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus, was deposed, was dethroned by the invaders. The time was called the Great Relocation of Nations. In the 4th and in the 5th century, a lot of nations from Northern Europe and Asia decided to migrate. Tens of millions of people transferred themselves for thousands of miles. They were all wanting a slice, a piece of a big cake. The Roman Empire, which was rich, wealthy, enjoyed a beautiful Mediterranean climate, had a lot of beautiful cities, had a lot of enjoyable olive groves, beautiful wineries. They all wanted the Roman Empire. And like wolves attacking its prey, those nations attacked the Romans. And they sliced and cut it into many pieces. This is the map of Europe in those days, about 1,500 years ago. And this is the list of these great nations. Those were the Alemannis, Burgundians, Franks, Lombards, Saxons, Sueves, Visigoths, Heruli, Vandals, and Ostrogoths. 7 of those nations would become the ancestors of people who populate Germany, Switzerland, France, Italy, England, Portugal, and Spain. 3 nations completely vanished. And by the way, a lot of people ask a question, what happened to these great people like Heruli, Ostrogoths and Vandals? Because Vandals, they destroyed Rome, they destroyed all the objects of art. And today, if you see a group of hooligans destroying and crushing everything, we call it the act of what? The act of vandalism, right? So the Vandals, they are even in our vocabulary talking about those ruthless people. Well, would you like to know what happened to those nations? Well, I won't tell it to you tonight. I will share about this next week when we'll talk about the mysterious Antichrist. We'll talk about the Antichrist who appeared on this planet hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And you will be able to identify who the Antichrist really is. And we're going to talk about that in the future. So please have patience. Our seminar, it has many chapters. It has many parts to it. And we're going to study all these things bit by bit, piece by piece. As you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, the prophecy says, so they will mix with one another in what? In marriage. But they will not hold together just as iron does not mix with clay. So the prophecy says they'll mix in marriage, but they will remain separated. Well, we all know that many people were trying to unite the kingdoms of Europe into one kingdom. Charles the Great, 1100 years ago, he managed to bring all the kingdoms of Europe into one domain. And he even called it a new Roman Empire, or as it was called, a Holy Roman Empire. Then he dies, and his empire was cut into many pieces. Napoleon Bonaparte, the great warrior, charging in all directions with his very well-trained and equipped French army. Well, he had a lot of problems when he invaded Russia in 1812 and later was finally defeated in the Battle of Waterloo in 1813. Adolf Hitler, he also was dreaming about the global conquest. And his dreams were not deemed to be fulfilled. 800 years ago in Mongolia, there rose a great Mongolian general, a great warrior by the name of Genghis Khan. Have you heard about him? Or Chinggis Khan. His empire, the Mongolian Empire, covered most of Asia and most of Eastern Europe. It was 33.3 million square kilometers, which is 1.5 times the size of the Soviet Union. It was the biggest empire on a single continent of all time. But it lasted for only a few decades, and it was again split into many little parts. The Japanese emperor was dreaming of bringing all of Asia under his domain and under his rule, but his hopes were not fulfilled because in the battles of the Pacific, the United States of America managed to constrain him and liberate a lot of Asian countries in the Second World War. We find that a lot of people historically were trying to bring those kingdoms together in one global empire, but it never happened. Even the European Union has a lot of challenges. European Union, of course, is not one country. It's like a political alliance of many countries. But you know what happened last year in Great Britain? Do you know the new English word today? It's called Brexit. Many European countries decided to vote against the adoption of a European constitution, including France and Holland, which said that Europe is basically one country. Europe remains divided, exactly as the prophecy predicted. And you will find this many times. It happened in the days of Napoleon Bonaparte. It happened during the Second World War. By the way, you see the great leaders of the time. You see Joseph Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill in Yalta, in Crimea, talking about the New World Order right at the end of the Second World War. And you will find that European nations are connected in marriage, especially when you take the royal families. You take Queen Elizabeth of Great Britain today, you will find that she has blood of many kings of Europe, including even a certain percent of Russian blood. And it was customary for the European leaders to marry each other. In the United States, when you learn the history of Eastern Europe, you probably remember about the Russian Tsar, a Russian king, Ivan the Terrible. Have you heard about Ivan the Terrible? He was a bloodthirsty king who killed 7 out of 8 of his wives. Okay, he was married 8 times. And there was a moment when he destroyed his 6th wife, and he decided to marry for the 7th time, and he decided to give an offer to, who do you think? Queen Victoria of England. So he sent her an official letter asking her to marry him. No, sorry, not Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth. So Queen Elizabeth writes him a kind refusal, saying, Our Majesty would be greatly honored to marry the Russian Tsar, but our heart belongs to someone else. Then he decided to marry her niece. There was a beautiful niece, and he made a proposal, but he received another refusal, because in the English courts they did not want to sacrifice the poor princess to the Russian Tsar, because they already knew he killed 6 wives. And thousands of his nobles. So they wrote him a kind refusal, saying, well, our niece would be greatly honored to marry the Russian Tsar, but she's not beautiful enough for him. So that was the refusal. Anyway, many European kingdoms are connected through marriage, but they always remained united. And look at, for 1,500 years, many big dreamers tried to bring Europe and the whole world together. But the prophet said 2,600 years ago, they will remain divided. And what do you have today? The world is still divided. The world may be united through many things, scientific achievements, internet, all kinds of technology, air travel, sea travel, all kinds of things. But the world will remain divided till the end of time. Now, let's talk about the stone. We're coming to the close of our program. In the next 5 minutes, we'll finish. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be what? Be destroyed. So there is going to be a climax in world's history. There's going to be an establishment of the new kingdom which will never be destroyed, nor shall its sovereignty be left to another people. So there will come a moment in time when humankind will begin to enjoy a golden age, a golden time in the development of human civilization. The stone, it says, shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end. And it shall stand for how long? Forever. So there will be a time when, because of the supernatural intervention from space, when the creator of the universe, the maker of space and time, will intervene into this world's history, and he will change the life of mankind forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king that what shall be hereafter. This dream is certain. And could you read the next phrase for me? And its interpretation, sure. So here in this text we find that this dream is very certain. It's very clear. And there will be the return of Jesus Christ to this world. And we'll talk more about this global event in the upcoming lectures, because about the end of time, people talk in all world's religions, in Christianity, in Islam, in Buddhism. Even atheists today come to a conclusion that once there will be a climax in the world's history. But there will be a fulfillment of human dream, because human beings for all ages, all times, were dreaming about a better world and about a better life. The fairy tales and the legends of ancient nations all over the world, Mayas in Mid-America, Incas in South America, Aboriginals in Australia, everyone was dreaming about that wonderful, beautiful time when there will be no more suffering, no more pain, no more sickness, and no more death. And according to the prophecy of this book, that time shall come. It's a beautiful, wonderful, amazing, life-transforming event of the future. Now, look at the reaction of King Nebuchadnezzar. He said, truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. And Nebuchadnezzar is not hiding his admiration, and he understands that there's something that is beyond the kings of this earth, something that is above all things, a supernatural creator who has an interest and a purpose and a plan for every human being, man and woman. Well, let's repeat what we've been learning today. 2,600 years ago, in the ancient city of Babylon, lived a king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. When I was a child, I called him Nebuchadnezzar. And he saw a dream, and in the dream he saw a big metal man with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron, and clay, and a big stone struck the image. And according to the very interpretation of Daniel, those different parts symbolized the future kingdoms of the world. And it starts with Babylon, the time in which Daniel lived. Then it follows, then Medo-Persia comes. Then it's followed by Greece, Rome, divided Europe, and the divided world in general. And then comes the stone, which symbolizes the establishment of a new world and a new golden era for human civilization. And the message that we can get from our lecture this evening is that the world's history is not like a runaway train. And when people are talking about a possibility of a nuclear war and possible self-destruction of mankind, or a strike of this planet by a meteorite and its ultimate human beings and mankind's destruction, I tell them that I have peace of mind. Because as I observe the fulfillment of prophecy in history, I have optimism in my mind and confidence in my heart in the future. Because the world is in good hands. The world's history is in the hands of this great Creator who has an interest, a personal interest in the lives not only of nations in general, like the United States, but also in the lives of you and me personally. He is a tactful God, He is a polite God, and He is a personal God. He has a personal interest in you and me. And He told Daniel years ago, shut up the words and seal the book until what time? Until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. There will come a moment in time when mankind will increase its knowledge, and they will also read the book of Daniel, see the fulfillment of prophecy, and make the most amazing discovery that this book is a message of love from heaven to you and me, that all Scripture is inspired by God. It was inspired divinely, and no prophecy ever came by the impulse of men, but men moved by the Holy Spirit, they spoke from God. And this book tells you and me today that your life and my life could be in good and powerful and reliable hands. Well, I'm concluding now. And overall, was the lecture tonight fairly clear to you? Okay, well, you're a wonderful audience. You're quite intelligent, by the way. And I have one last question. Would you like that someone would look after your life and would provide for all your needs? Could I see the hands of those who would like God to look after you and provide for all your needs? Wonderful. Let me have a word of prayer for you. Dear God, who gave prophecy, I'm asking you today to give your heavenly benefits and your heavenly wealth to every person who is present here. I'm asking you to give your personal attention to every single person who is listening, and give them peace and assurance in their personal future and the future of their family and this great country of the United States of America. And when this beautiful new world comes, help us all to be there. Amen.